the numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host Bob Zero. With me in Deadbug Studios is
Coach Nez.
Visit us at zpnetwork.com, as well as online.com. We're on Facebook and Twitter at the Nothing Shocking, or at Facebook at the Nothing Shocking Podcast Community Fan Page, the Quad Cities Rock and Roll Junkies Interest Group, and our Twitter handle is No Shock Pod. We are in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all your podcatchers. Subscribe to the show, rate and review the show. We will read your review on the air. And we are on Rock Rage Radio Sundays at 2 p.m. Central Time. Our sponsors are
Ragged Records, Davenport, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois, but right now the Rock Island location is the only location that's open due to the flood recovery efforts of the Mississippi River. We have Legends Picks Guitar Picks out of Milan, Illinois, and RockstarPicks.rocks out of Queens, New York.
And then Hong Kong Sleepover. I want to thank them for letting us use their music on the show. They've got The Butcher and Bolt out now. It's on everywhere you get music, Apple, Google,
everywhere, yeah,
Amazon, Spotify. Listen to it; it's phenomenal. You can hear the songs on the podcast. They're a great band. Our guest this week is kind of a legend.
There's kinda, or is he a legend? I think he's a legend.
He's in the Eagles, or was in the Eagles. Don Felder.
And I was not here for that interview because it was a Friday morning. Was that early?
He is a morning guy. He was. I ended up getting this one around noon. I had to do it at work at lunch, but he wanted to do them. The first couple, we kept trying to schedule them, and then we would get time zones wrong, and then I had something pop up where I couldn't do it. This got postponed like 3 times, and nobody's fault. It's just kind of weird scheduling situations. But it finally happened, and I don't know. His new record, American Rock and Roll, I believe it's called, is just, it's really, really good. I was expecting it to be, when you go to a concert for someone who's a legend in the business, you want to hear their hits. And then when they play their new stuff, you go get a beer. This is not the stuff you go get a beer to. It's really, really good, and he's got everybody playing on it. Slash is on it, Mick Fleetwood, Chad Smith. That's just one song. There's a song where Mick Fleetwood starts the drums and Chad Smith finishes it.
Oh, cool.
The opening track, and Slash plays guitar over it. Who else is on it? Richie Sambora and Orianthi do a song together with him, which is ridiculous. Sammy Hagar sings on it. Alex Lifeson. I mean, there's probably 3 times more than that. I don't have it in front of me, so there's a ton of great artists on this record. It's not even funny, and the music's really, really good. It's not. There's Eagles-like tracks on it, but it's also very rock and roll. And as he says in the interview, he could expand his songwriting. He didn't have to be limited to Don Henley singing, so he can only play a certain drum complicated beat. He could do whatever he wanted. He could go outside of Don Henley's range. He could go, do whatever. He didn't have to play with limits, and that was really, really cool. He's a talker. I got to ask like 5 questions, and I had 30 minutes, and he went to like 30 minutes and 30 seconds. I mean, he went over the time. It was a lot of fun. I wish we could have got him on our normal Tuesday night, but he's a morning guy, and I'm really excited to have just share with everybody, and I really think everybody should go check out the album. And
I think that what a lot of our listeners, if they're not familiar with, they just depend on us getting the guests on. And trying to get Don Felder on was easier said than done. getting guests on this podcast is not the easiest thing that can be done. It's it's the most challenging. And when I sent that invitation to him, I wasn't expecting a response, and then he was eager and willing to do it on a early morning with you. Would he offer like a 7 o'clock in the morning in the beginning or something like that?
Yeah, and it pretty much that was the first year. Then he happened to I think he was on the West Coast on the Friday I did it, and so it worked out to be like 11 or noon. So it's still probably early for him. But it was, like I said, it was an honor to have him on, and to be quite honest, we got a couple of great guests coming up for you. We got. I don't even know if I want to spoil it. You've already showed it on the Facebook.
Whenever we get the guest interview over with, I do a coming soon advertisement because we've already had it done, and now we just have to wait for the order for it to be released.
Right. We got Bumblefoot's coming up in the coming weeks, and who else do we had? Phil
Suzanne.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great interviews in the pipeline. And we still have more scheduled that are going to be great. So stick around for those. In terms of their Quad City area, obviously it doesn't necessarily go with the Eagles and Don Felder, but Slayer's coming to the Quad Cities.
November
14th with Phil Anselmo, Primus, Ministry. It's going to be a hell of a show. One of their last shows is going to be in Moline, Illinois, which is kind of cool.
Well, I'm excited to see Ministry because we've had Sin Karen and John Bechtel on, both members of Ministry, and they were great interviews. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing Ministry the most. I know it's kind of weird for me to say that, but we've gotten to know those guys so well that
I've never seen any of them. I've never even seen Pantera before, so I'm excited to see Phil. I'm excited to see Primus. That'll be neat. And then Slayer. So I mean, there's it's just going to be a fun night. Also Godsmack and Hailstorm September 22nd, Ghost October 8th, and I don't have the dates in front of me because I can't get it to pull up, but Bryan Adams and Steely Dan are also coming. It's all of a sudden out of nowhere we get no rock music, then in like a 3-month span we're getting 5 or 6.
Does that mean the wave of rock and roll is kind of possibly returning to pop culture to a certain degree? Would you agree or not?
Potentially. I mean, I was shocked. I knew Godsmack was an arena band, but you need usually a band with them to help them play there, and Hailstorm is that band. Ghost, though, they're also an arena band, and I think that's really, really cool. Slayer, same thing. I mean, they're legends, but I was kind of worried that the future of rock music was not going to necessarily hit the arena level because, who's, Five Finger Death Punch is kind of the last band. They've been around a while, and even they can't play without another band, or they haven't been able to. So it looks like the tide's turning, and it's kind of exciting. And I really can't wait for this fall to get here. So
yeah, I'm really pumped up for
hang out at the Iowa Tax Slayer Center for 3 months straight. I'm heading to Cedar Rapids too to see Rob Zombie and.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And then I'm going to Kentucky to see Guns N' Roses and a bunch of other bands.
And there's a possibility maybe Flying Colors might be coming.
Oh, they're
back.
coming to the St. Charles.
When is that?
I don't have it in front of me.
Is it this fall or is it the wintertime or what are we looking
fall,
at?
I think.
We got to go, right? We got to do it.
Yeah. I need to make sure that hasn't sold out yet. I forgot about that. But yeah. It's an exciting time with rock music, especially here in the Quad Cities. We still haven't had Rock the District announced yet.
They
Nelly's
did.
coming. They did?
That's going to be the Rock the District.
They're not doing Rock the District this year?
Well, they're running out of time.
Not necessarily.
They
got August, September.
We're encroaching mid-July.
All you got to do is like a 3-week notice. That's what they've done every other year.
I think we had plenty of notice before Bush, did we not? Last year?
Maybe a month. Maybe a month.
I don't foresee it. I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, we usually have some information coming our way by now.
Nelly's not coming till like late. I bet you there's a shot. We'll see.
You are way too optimistic tonight.
I don't think it's going to be good, whoever it is. But I don't know. Anyway, Don Felder is a guest. Enjoy.
Good night.
Felder. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Hold on 1 second. I'm on a speaker and I'm my AirPods. Can you hear me now any better?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Yeah. It's just when I'm in a car and it's on speaker, sometimes the ambient noise sounds a little funky. So, okay, we're ready to go. What's up?
Well, first and foremost, it's an honor to talk with you. I'm a big fan. I always have been, and I've got the new album, American Rock and Roll, and I've been listening to it a lot lately. And one thing I love is that an artist with your legendary catalog is still creating new music. How important is it for you to keep creating new music at this point in your career?
You know, being an artist, I think is very multifaceted, especially in music, because you get to really do a lot of different things as opposed to just being a performer. I love to go out and play live. I love making people happy and playing songs that they've known for decades and my historical work that people recognize. But the thrill of and the excitement of actually walking into a dark studio with no idea, turning on the power, letting some idea come through you, whether it's a guitar lick or a chord progression or a vocal or a lyric idea, and start with a little pencil sketch of what this thing looks like and blow life into it, put some flesh on the skeletons of this idea, and by the end of the day, you hit play, and there's something there that excites you. It may not be the final version of it, but the creative process of music to me is just as exciting, if not more so, but in a different way than performing live. By the time you go out and perform live, you have written and created and rehearsed and recorded and mastered and mixed and done the whole project. And then you get to go perform it for people. A lot of times they're hearing it for the first time, or they've heard it a few times online or streamed it or whatnot, or they've heard it on the radio. And that's a good judge to me of how people respond to a new song that they haven't heard. And if they're up and rocking and dancing and having a great time and give you a good round of applause, Tommy Shaw says, the public votes by their feet. And I went, what do you mean? He says, if they're on their feet, they're liking it. So to me, it's a great thing to be able to write something out of thin air and blow life into it, work on it, arrange it, produce it, mix it, master it, and then go out and play it on stage and see what kicks and what doesn't. And so far, I love both sides of the process of live performances. I think because one of the reasons that, to me, is that I fell in love with jazz late 60s, early 70s, and lived in New York City for 2 years playing in a jazz fusion rock band, where you don't go out and play the same solos exactly like it's on the record over and over and over and over and over for years. Every time you walk on stage, you play a fresh, created, inspired solo coming out of you at that moment. And to be able to develop that ability to improvise, to be momentarily, spontaneously creative, and not be repetitive, is a really great gift if you can do it and develop it as an artist. I think one of the people that I first saw or heard do it in rock music was Eric Clapton in Cream, where he would just take off and play these solos. I doubt he could play the same solo twice. It was just him going for it, And so there was that rock inspiration that was around at the time. To do that in the studio has been a real blessing, to have paid my dues, starving on the streets of New York, to develop improvisation, and then to be able to go into the studio and just make up something is really exciting. I have friends of mine that are actors, and they say there's a huge difference in being on a set where you're filming a movie or you're filming a television show, and you could do take after take, and you do 12 takes, and you go, oh, wait, we've got to change the flag on this light. We want to have a slightly different camera angle. Can you guys do those lines again over and over and over, as opposed to an actor that walks out on stage, on a Broadway stage, in front of a live audience, and can't miss a beat. He can't miss a cue. He can't miss a line. It's got to be exactly as it's written. And so there's a thrill and excitement and a euphoria that happens on live performances that also happens in the studio in the creative side of it. So I'm hooked on doing both. And so I love writing and creating and recording and playing live. That's, to me, that's the utmost, thrill of being a musician.
You know, when you go into that dark room, and I mean, the album is very diverse. The Eagles were a very diverse band, and this album's even more diverse than them, as was your last one. Do you go in there with an idea every time, or do you just kind of play and whatever comes out, comes out? Like, is this like, I'm going to do a softer song now, or I'm going to do or does it depend on the mood you're in, or do you have anything defined when you go into that dark room?
My writing process or development process is a continuing process. Whether I'm driving down the 405 freeway and I hear an idea for a chorus and I start singing it, and I reach over and grab my iPhone and I record some of it so I don't forget it, nothing may ever happen with it. Or I'm sitting on the couch watching a movie and I'm listening to some sound orchestra score that's being played behind this movie soundtrack, and it goes through a really beautiful transition, like a modulation. I stop, I rewind it, go get an acoustic guitar, sit and figure out what that modulation was, record it on my iPhone, and put it away. Sit on airplanes with my laptop instead of watching those dumb movies that they give you on airlines. I sit and write lyrics. I write song lyrics. There's not even a song in my head at the time as much as there is an idea for lyrics. So I'll write 4 verses, a chorus, a bridge, no music, just a lyric song idea. Some days I go into my studio and I just pick up 3 or 4 or 5 different guitars, or just start playing, play guitar licks, start playing rhythm chords, just noodling around and kind of see what comes out. And usually there's 2 or 3 things that come out that I catch maybe 2 bars of or 4 bars of, and I go, wow, that's great. Let me play that over and over and over, and we'll make that like an introduction line for a song, or a turnaround line, or this rhythm guitar part sounds really cool. We could use this for a bridge. And so I just kind of just explore in there. And then when it's time to actually go in and start making a record, I have a lot of bits and pieces of musical ideas, lyrical ideas, song ideas, guitar licks that I can kind of take some of those and begin to turn those things into, from a 4-bar phrase, a pile of lyrics about some song, I can turn those into something that becomes a song format. Now, there's other things that I want to do and I intend to do in this next record that I've been thinking about for a long time. I want to do and intend to go in and do an instrumental song, not really like a song where it's got an introduction and verse and chorus and all that stuff, or an instrumental orchestral piece for multiple guitars. Acoustic guitars, electric guitars, mandocello guitars, much like you would write for an orchestra with first violin, second violin, viola, cello, piano, da-da-da. But I want to do it in a much more modern idiom using not only acoustic guitars, but electric guitars, slide guitars, pedal steel guitars, mandolin sections, you know what I mean? And create something that's just totally different as just a musical instrumental piece. I have no idea what that is yet, but I have the concept to do that, and I know what I'll do is I know how to do that. I'll go in and I'll take the first 8 bars and I'll write some really pretty melody, and then I'll embellish that and develop that through the course of the next minute or 2 minutes until I get to a point. If you listen to orchestral pieces, they usually start very sweet, and then they build. They have some sort of climax there, and it gets big, and then there's a recapitulation back to the beginning to restate the melodies. And I know the form of it. I just want to do it not with an orchestra. I want to do it with the Don Felder Guitar Orchestra, just all by myself, and play everything. Or unless I get different people to come play on it as well, that would be fantastic. So it wouldn't all sound like me playing different guitars. So maybe I'll write the thing and then invite some other people to be part of the Don Felder Guitar Orchestra. Just different things. It may not sell 5 copies, but that's not the point. It's the exploration that brings so much fun and excitement to me. Taking on a challenge like that and actually doing it, and having it turn out really well would be fun for me to do.
That sounds fascinating. Have you always felt this free as an artist, or was there ever a point in your career where you kind of felt handcuffed?
The only time I felt, and it really wasn't handcuffed, when I was in the Eagles, I had to write music for a very specific set of people. I knew how everyone played. I knew that Don Henley can't play really complicated drum parts and sing at the same time. And I really knew the limitations of the different bass players, so I couldn't write really, complicated bass parts. I guess the closest is that as I wrote the introduction bass part and the bass line and everything for one of these nights, and then had to teach Randy Meisner when he came into the studio that part. I wrote the bass part for Hotel California, which is a kind of an unusual, quirky kind of bass part, and then I had to teach Randy how to play that bass part. So I had to have a specific cast of characters. Like if you were to write for, I don't know, a sitcom, the characters and how they play and what their characters are and their style. I know the vocal range that band could sing in. So to write for that group of people in the direction that they wanted to go, as opposed to just being able to write anything I wanted to write, really wasn't restricting, but it was a very disciplined approach for me to write within the context of that framework. Where before I had this jazz fusion rock band that was, we had 17-minute songs with jazz solos and stuff in the middle of it. And it was a way of really specifically learning how to write for that particular cast of characters. That's the only time I felt restricted. And then now outside of that, I can write everything. When you look at these songs that are on this record and even on the previous record, Road to Forever, there's a wide variety of things. There's a lullaby on Road to Forever. There's a Hispanic, little Latin lover that gives me a chance to play nylon guitar. That song came about that a friend of mine and I flew down to Argentina, and he was dating in Buenos Aires. He was dating a beautiful tango instructor. So she took us to this tango club where you sit around the outside of this massive oval dance floor at a table, and you have a little snack or a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and you watch these fantastic tango dancers, couples, men and women, doing this just erotic, beautiful dance going around and around and around on this big oval. And I said, that's a song. I have to write a song about that. And so I wanted to write something that would enable me to be able to play nylon string guitar and at the same time have that Latin flavor. So the whole song and that song came out of a trip down to Buenos Aires and watching people dance the tango.
That's funny.
Which would have never wound up on an Eagles record. It's just,
right.
That's not going to happen there. So.
That's funny. That's the last song I just listened to, actually. And I was, in my mind, the reason I asked the question earlier when you go into that dark room is, clearly you had that in mind that you wanted to write some sort of song like that. So that's a fascinating story. You've had some...
The song American Rock and Roll came about that way, too. I had been looking back at a bunch of old photographs, and it showed... the Eagles in 1975 standing on a stage in Wembley Stadium playing with Elton John. And there was probably 110,000 people there. And so actually the story is about a song called Rock You. And I wanted to write a song that was a stadium anthem rock and roll song. So I wrote that song, I wrote the track, I wrote the lyrics, and I wanted to get like somebody that has just a killer rock and roll voice to do a duet with. So I wound up asking Sammy Hagar, who he and I have been friends together for a long time, and he sang a duet with me. We traded off lyrics and verses on it. Satriani came in and played some guitar stuff with me that just made it perfect for that track. Bob Weir, who lives a couple of blocks from Sammy's studio, came in, and I snagged him to sing on the chorus, Rock You, about 5 or 6 times. So it was, it was just the perfect combination of people to play on that particular song. But the song American Rock and Roll turned out to, can you hold on 1 second? I'm getting another call from my office. Okay.
Sure.
Are you there still?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. I was at Woodstock in 1969, one of the 400,000 soaking wet, mud-covered spectators, right? And the 3 days of unbelievable music that happened there between seeing Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana, the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, Crosby, Stills, Nash, all those people that played there was probably, if not definitely, the largest rock and roll nuclear explosion that ever happened on the planet Earth. And the fallout from that explosion was a global effect. It affected people all over the world, all over the planet. And there's even a line in Hotel California that says, we haven't had that spirit here since 1969. Mm-hmm. It's talking about that spirit at Woodstock, that unbelievable, just magical time of all those people playing all that great music and everybody there, 400,000 people. It was just phenomenal. So to me, that was the beginning of the explosion of rock and roll. Yep, we had the Beatles and stuff before that, and the Stones, but all of that put together was by far more impacting on everybody in America than any of the Beatles stuff. So I went through decades after Woodstock and talked about artists that had not only been influenced by those original artists at Woodstock, but had risen to a level of their own, that they were now, big stars, but they would all come from the roots and the impact of Woodstock that had propelled for decades after that. All the way down to Slash. You ask him who some of his favorite guitar players are, and Jimi Hendrix, so all of those players that just impacted all of those people. So I wanted to write a song that was like a historical rockumentary, is what it was, a musical rockumentary of American rock and roll. And I started thinking about who can I get to play on this? Now, I've known Mick Fleetwood since the 70s when the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac toured together. Mick and I have played golf together. We've done charity work together. So when he plays, sounds like late 60s, early 70s. The sound of his drums, the way he plays, it's just so identifiable. So he starts off that whole album on that first track by himself. Mm-hmm. And it sets the tone for American rock and roll. And about halfway through the song, I got Chad Smith from the Chili Peppers to come in and play drums on it. Chad comes in and he feels like a 5,000-pound gorilla on steroids. He plays so hard and so loud and so intense that it just elevates the whole second half of this song, and it sounds like the Chili Peppers and the Foo Fighters and all that really aggressive, harder rock and roll that wasn't in existence for the first 2 decades with, the Allman Brothers and Bob Seger and all that stuff. It shifted gears musically. So I tried to make that morphing migration from 69 through the decades musically, as well as mentioning all the artists along the way, and a salute to them. That's really what it is. It's that they were impacted by that and now have risen to the top of the heap themselves and been acknowledged by it. So there's the next to the last verse talks about Slash and Rose and Guns N' Roses. So I said, we got to get Slash in here to just play some licks on that verse. It would be great for a while. We're talking about Guns N' Roses, that he comes in and plays a couple of his just like really Slash identifiable licks. So he comes in and he says, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, just go back and start recording at the top. So he just plays through the whole thing 2 or 3 times, way more than we need, all of which is really great. And after he leaves, we go through and edit, take some stuff out, make some room for me to play in and around what he said. Took his best licks and put them in the right places where we thought they should be. And then I sat down and overdubbed parts the slide, emulating what Dwayne taught me how to play slide when I mentioned the Allman Brothers, and just things along the way, answering Slash's solos and things like that. So it sort of has this tonality of going from decade to decade to decade to decade. And that was the idea for that song. And it just came about from looking at some old pictures of and thinking about Woodstock and me being there and where music is today. And it's, like I said, it's a rock community.
There's 2 things I kind of want to follow up with before we end here. You mentioned where music is today and where music came from. In between, I was kind of like 12, 13, 14 when grunge hit. And your song captures, it pays tribute to all those eras. But when I was coming up, you were either a grunge fan or you're like a Motley Crue fan. If you liked one, you couldn't like the other. But now you listen to classic rock radio, and you can hear Metallica, then Poison, then the Eagles, then all within the same half an hour. Was it ever that competitive back in like the 70s when you were coming up, or was that just more dedicated to that era of music?
I'm not sure. I think there was more of a reflection by program directors, because back in the 70s, there was not one huge, massive radio network. Mm-hmm. And I won't go to say who it was or is, but there were a lot of mom and pop, individually owned, separate, large broadcasting radio stations all over the United States. They would follow the charts of what was happening, of who was the top 10 charts for AM radio, for who was on easy listening, and all that sort of stuff, and they would play accordingly off of those charts. Now, if I went into a radio station and sat there and talked for 30 minutes about a new album, blah, 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 they were so grateful that they would pick my record up and start playing it, right? Mm-hmm. Today, it's not that way. Almost all the radio stations across the country follow the same massive program directive imperative. Mm-hmm. And including Sirius, they have their different channels and stuff, but they don't have the freedom as DJs or as independents to play what they like and what they want and what they think their local broadcasting listening audiences will appreciate and do. So it's become it's changed a great deal. So it may have changed for the better if you're one of those artists that gets plugged by Clear Channel across all those radio stations. or it's changed for the worst if you're not one of those. But the equalizing factor is a lot of the streaming, where you can go on Pandora and you can go on these other streaming companies and listen to what you want to. The only problem I have with that is the artists, the songwriters, and the publishers get paid 90%.
Right.
I think Peter Frampton said last year that he had something like 300 million streams on one of his songs, and he got a check from, I don't know if it was Pandora or who it was, for $32.
Jesus.
For 300 million plays. And we're actually doing some work now in Washington with ASCAP about changing that, because that's just completely, it's ripping off the writers and the publishers who try to make a living, not just people like ourselves that can go out and perform and make a good living. Those guys that are trying to make a living in Nashville writing songs, and they don't live an expensive life. They can barely put food on the table. Yet they're writing great, huge, successful songs, but since albums aren't selling millions of copies and it's not being played so much on radio, it's being played on streaming, they're not making any money. So anyway, we're working on that. I was just back in Washington doing some testifying about that exact same thing, trying to help all the songwriters and publishers.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, that's one thing. Like, radio is not dead yet, and it's just when if I listen to my local radio, classic rock station, Dream On's gonna be played at the same time every day, and it's just like, if you pull that out and put Charmed or Limelight or and there's several bands that play that would benefit from that. You would see sales go up. I don't, because they fit right in with that classic rock sound. And it's so frustrating for me to the point where I don't really listen to it. I don't want to, Aerosmith's my favorite band. I love Dream On, but I'm kind of sick of it right now, and I hate saying that.
Go ahead. I've got to run here in just a minute. I've got another call in 3 minutes.
All right, last question. Growing up, there was the mystery behind our favorite artists, and now there's a lot of accessibility with social media. As a fan and as an artist, do you prefer that mystique behind your rock and roll, or do you kind of like the accessibility that's out there?
Sure. Are you there?
Yeah, are you there?
Yeah, I used to be able to slither around unnoticed. And pretty low profile, but with the advent of some of these documentaries that have come out, like The History of the Eagles, my appearances on Access Television with Sammy Hagar, a bunch of that stuff, and my picture all over the internet on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, I get recognized a lot more, which is both good, and I really kind of miss being able to just be unknown, and just be able to sit down at a table and talk to somebody and them not know who I am, and have a person-to-person just conversation without being, oh my God, you know what I mean? It's like, and the person that I know that has really shown me some of the most grace, I had 2 or 3 people. I'm friends with Sly Stallone and Cheech Marin. Go figure how I have those 2 friends. But when these people are walking around, they're unbelievably identifiable. Cheech can't walk 2 blocks without somebody going, hey, dude, hey, Cheech, man, how you doing? And stuck on an invisible joint, right?
Right.
And Stallone is so unbelievably visible that it's really hard for him to get out of his car and walk into a restaurant without being recognized. So they handle it with such grace and appreciation and a smile and graciousness that I've really learned that it's when people don't yell your names, it's when people don't recognize you that you really should start worrying, to tell you the truth. But, at some point, it does get just a little old. I remember I did this cruise ship about 4 years ago, And I didn't realize the 5,000 people that were on this rock and roll cruise ship actually were there to see me, to see the Doobie Brothers, to see REO, a bunch of bands. And our pictures had been all over the internet, all over the ship, everywhere. And so when I get to my cabin, I go, I've never been on one of these massive cruise ships. I think I'm just going to go take a walk around and see what this ship is like. So I go to the elevator. There's a 12-story elevator. I push the button. I'm waiting there, and I look around, and it looks like about 25 people are running towards me. And I go, uh-oh. And everybody's got their cell phone, and everybody's got something for me to sign. And they go, Mr. Felder, can I get a selfie? And I go, oh, God, I'm sorry, I forgot something in my cabin. I'll be right back. I run down the hallway, go in, close the door, lock. And I have to wind up sitting in my cabin for 5 days. I can't walk around outside. And so, that's just because I was so highly advertised on that one ship. But I find it very gracious. I try to be very kind to the fans that really show appreciation, that come to the shows, want me to sign something, and all that sort of stuff. So I really enjoy it. Okay, I got to go.
Thank you.
All right, man.
Bye.
I'll be broadcasting the underdeal. When the black is rough and the sky is choppy, no power in the verse can stop me. Knowing you can't win for trying, man, I'll be holding your arms, I'll be holding your hand. I'll be mooning the blue sun and urging I'm good. I'll be saving the day like you knew I would. When the black is rough and the sky is choppy, no power in the verse can stop me. I'll be swinging the gun round and causing you pain. I'll be leaving you standing there in the rain. I'll be putting my boat in the unfriendly sky. I'll be doing the same till the day I die. When the black is rough and the sky is choppy, no power in the verse can stop me.